Welcome to the People's Maps Commission virtual public hearing for the 1st Congressional District. The hearing will now begin. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. This evening's hearing includes testimony from 2 subject matter experts who will share how local communities can be impacted by redistricting. We have Wausau Mayor Katie Rosenberg and Department of Revenue Secretary Peter Barca, who was the Assembly Minority Leader when the last legislative maps were drawn. Finally, beginning at approximately 7 p.m., the public testimony portion of the meeting will begin. As a reminder, due to the unfortunate spread of COVID-19, this is a virtual hearing with many participants from around the state and nation, and technology can be fickle even under the best of circumstances. We appreciate in advance the patience and understanding of viewers, as well as presenters and commission members, should there be any technical challenges this evening. With that, we will now hand it over to Commission Chair Christopher Ford to call the meeting to order.
Good evening. I would like to call the 6th hearing of the People's Maps Commission to order. As a reminder, tonight we don't need a quorum because we're not voting on any matters. This is an informational hearing only. I'm going to go down the line. When I say your name, if you could please say present. Commissioner Tobias from the 1st Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Anthony from the 2nd Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd.
Present.
Commissioner Rangal from the 4th Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Ram from the 5th Congressional District.
Present.
And Commissioner Prentice from the 6th Congressional District.
Present.
Commissioner Bissonette from the 7th Congressional District.
Present.
And Commissioner Phillips from the 8th Congressional District.
Present.
Thank you. Before we begin tonight's hearing, I want to make sure the citizens of the 1st Congressional District, where we're having our virtual hearing this evening, are able to get to know us a little bit more, know our individual commission members. I'll now invite each one of the commission members to say a few introductory remarks. And we'll start in the 1st Congressional District with Commissioner Tobias.
Hi, thank you, Chair Ford, and good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Tobias. I am from the 1st Congressional District. I live in the city of Racine and work for the Racine Unified School District. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Anthony from the 2nd Congressional District.
Thank you, Chairman Ford. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ruben Anthony from the 2nd Congressional District. I live here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm really excited about this work because I believe that making sure that our democracy works in this state is very important. And I know that the work of this commission will give us a better product than we have. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to be with you tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Anthony. Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd Congressional District.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anne Marie McClellan, and I live in Menominee, Wisconsin, on the west side of the state. I'm retired, and I'm very happy and honored to be on this committee, at this commission, and we've learned so much over the last few months, listening to testimony and hearing the speakers, and I look forward to this evening learning even more.
Thank you, Commissioner McClellan. Commissioner Rangal from the 4th Congressional District.
Thank you, Chair Ford. Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin Rangal. I proudly serve as a high school government teacher at Cristo Rey Jesuit High School here in Milwaukee. Grew up in Racine, went to school in Madison, and been living in Milwaukee for the last few years now. Super grateful and just honored to be on this commission. I think democracy is incredibly important, but one essential part of that democracy is fair maps and making sure our process is representative and fair. And so that's just what our commission is trying our best to do. I do want to just plug for anyone who's watching, please let others know about our work and spread the word for upcoming congressional hearings or congressional district hearings about our work. And as we get closer to the real work of the map making, we will try our best to be as transparent and open as possible around that process. So please let your friends, your family, groups you're a part of know about the work we're doing so that we can make sure that the whole state of Wisconsin is advocating for fair maps when that time comes. But looking forward to the public comment and to the testimony from the experts. Thank you.
Amen. I think we all second that as well. Commissioner Ram from the 5th Congressional District.
Hi, good evening. My name is Susan Ramft. I represent the 5th District. I live in Wauwatosa. I'm an HR leader for Manpower Group in Milwaukee. And I echo everything my colleagues have spoken. It's quite an honor to be part of this and to contribute to this with all of you. And thanks for everyone joining us tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Rapp. Commissioner Prentice from the 6th Congressional District.
Thank you, Chair Ford, and good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Prentice, and I am a librarian. I live and work in the city of Sheboygan, and I'm happy to be here tonight representing the 6th Congressional District, and will echo again what all of my fellow commissioners said on what an honor it is to be here, and I'm looking forward to learning more and hearing more from the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bissonnette from the 7th Congressional District.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ford. My name is Jason Bissonnette. I'm the Dean of Students for the Lucudere Ojibwe K-12 school. And I also sit on the Board of Regents for the Lucudere Ojibwe College. I'm in the 7th Congressional. I live in Sawyer County, where it was a balmy 26 below this morning on the way to work. And I think tomorrow is going to be colder. So I'm absolutely honored to be here. Like everyone else has said, I think this is such a vital part of our democracy, and I'm excited about being here. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Phillips from the 8th Congressional District.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ford. My name is Tony Phillips. I live in Appleton. I'm a cancer physician, though now retired. I'm very grateful to be representing the 8th Congressional District in this very important process. I want to thank the speakers. We're going to hear from a mayor about how gerrymandering affects cities, maybe, and from somebody who was there in 2010 when this was occurring, a legislator. So we'll get that perspective. So I'm excited to hear from the speakers and very excited to get more input from citizens making public comments, specifically about how gerrymandering has affected you. So thank all of you for participating. That's all I have to say, Chair Ford. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm Chris Ford. I'm from the 4th Congressional District as well. I'm an emergency medicine physician and chairman of the People's Maps Commission. And, you know, just as a broken record, I want to echo everyone else. We're very honored and privileged to be a part of this process and learning a lot during the last few months here, especially learning a lot about each other and working together on this process. You know, as we continue to go along this process, we'll start to kind of roll up our sleeves a little bit more and get into the nitty gritty of drawing, putting a figurative pen to paper and drawing this map here. And we're during these hearings learning a little bit more about it. I hope the citizens of the 1st Congressional District and all those who are watching throughout the state can see that each of us commissioners are truly normal and average Wisconsinites. We all come from diverse backgrounds, as you clearly heard from all of our commissioners, and we hold different kind of jobs and even have very political beliefs. But the one thing that we have in common is the desire to have fair and legislative maps to work together with the citizens throughout the state to make those maps happen as well. What I'll do now is we're going to invite Commissioner Tobias to provide an overview here of the 1st Congressional District. And so without any further ado, Commissioner Tobias. Oh, I think you're muted. Yeah.
So sorry about that. Thank you, Chair Ford. And thank you to my fellow commission members for joining me virtually this evening in Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District. For those of you who are not familiar with my district, let me just share a few things with you. According to the last census, my district has a total population of over 710,000 people and has some of the most diverse communities in Wisconsin: Racine, Kenosha, and Janesville. It also includes some of the Milwaukee suburbs, such as Hales Corners, Franklin, Oak Creek, and Muskego. But it is also important to note that 15% of the district is considered rural. Rural communities in my district includes communities such as Eagle, Salem, Clinton, and East Troy. And let's not forget these quick fun facts that sets apart the 1st Congressional District. Racine is home of the Kringle. Yes, that delicious breakfast treat. The Kringle is actually our state's officially recognized state peace tree. East Troy's Railroad Museum welcomes over 15,000 visitors from around the world each year. And the Wind Point Lighthouse, located in Racine, first lit in 1880, is one of the oldest and tallest active lighthouses on the Great Lakes. And finally, I'd like to just take some time to briefly share my own personal view of my district. For much of my life, I have lived in Racine. Back in the day, Racine and Kenosha were considered major industrial cities. At one point in time, Racine County alone had more than 300 established manufacturing and small business firms. Of course, much of that has changed over the decades. And thankfully, there are still companies that have remained in the area, such as S.C. Johnson & Son, Modine Manufacturing, Jockey International, and Snap-on. After graduating from college, I remained in Racine, dedicating my career to working for nonprofit organizations to help those in need and to better my community. I remain in the city of Racine and am raising my family here because I love my community and I am hopeful. I am hopeful that Racine will continue to move forward. I am hopeful that local and state legislators hear the needs of my community and pass laws positively affecting the day-to-day lives of families throughout the district. As others, I am honored to be a part of the People's Maps Commission and look forward to continue working towards change and the betterment of my community. And I know the residents of the 1st Congressional District are just as passionate about fair maps as I am. And I look forward to hearing from some of our constituents later tonight. So I thank everyone for attending this evening. And I thank you, Chair Ford, for the opportunity to provide this overview to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Tobias. I always love these because I feel like, we get to know each other a little bit more, even though we're virtually meeting since the very beginning of this, but, very informative. But yours is the first one that makes me hungry. I want a Kringle now. I feel like but thank you, Commissioner Tobias. As the Commission has learned over the past few hearings, developing legislative districts and redistricting is a complicated science that can impact individuals in various ways. Tonight, we are pleased to have two individuals presenting this evening who have experienced and witnessed the impacts of redistricting on all the local Wisconsin communities. Before we begin, I'll ask, as always, our commissioners please save their questions until both of this evening's presenters have presented. Our first presenter is Katie Rosenberg, who was elected the mayor of Wausau in April of last year. Before being elected mayor, she was elected to Marathon County Board in 2016 and re-elected in 2018. Mayor Rosenberg, thank you for taking the time to participate in this evening's hearing, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm trying to start my video. Hi, thank you so much. So good evening, commissioners and members of the governor's staff, and of course, neighbors here in Wisconsin. I'm Katie Rosenberg, and I'm the mayor of the city of Wausau. So if you need a visual, we are right smack in the middle of Marathon County, which is right smack in the middle of the state. We're the biggest city in the 7th Congressional District, and we're a big county by land, but about 136,000 by population. But still, our county is divvied up between 5 assembly districts and 3 Senate districts. So I served on the Marathon County Board for 2 terms, and during that time, only twice did a member of any of those 8 legislative districts show up to a meeting. Only once did a legislator give an update. And the Wausau School District, in which I live, serves fewer than 10,000 students. But it's part of 3 different assembly districts. And before this meeting, I asked a member of the school board how many times a legislator has attended a meeting or given an update to the board over her 6-year tenure. And that answer was 0. So I've been in office for 296 days today. And we're a year into the pandemic, and I've talked to my state senator, but I haven't heard from my representative. So why am I mentioning this? Before I was mayor, I worked in marketing at a Fortune 500 company. And one of the things I was responsible for was efficiently spending dollars and times to convert potential customers into actual customers. So there's a science to that. We only targeted certain age groups and certain interests because they would reliably buy our products if we put the right pictures and words in front of them. If someone from outside those groups converted, that was great, but we weren't talking to them because we didn't have to. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here. There's this science behind gerrymandering, and it means that the legislators who represent our city don't have to talk to us. They don't have to care about issues that can make or break a city. They can focus on the issues that reliably convert for them while ignoring the rest. So that might be good for business, but it's bad for democracy. It's bad for public engagement. It's bad for solutions-oriented policymaking. So, we have shared constituents. We should at least be somewhat aligned on what the wants and needs of our communities are. I would say that our communities should be demanding more from us and them, but the truth is, actually are. The Marathon County Board recently passed a resolution supporting nonpartisan redistricting. And these are county board supervisors that represent a county that went 60% for Republicans in the last election. That means that independents, Democrats, and Republicans are demanding fair apportionment, fair representation. Just to the north in Lincoln County, a county that also went 60% for former President Trump in the last election, also voted 65% in favor of nonpartisan redistricting on a countywide referendum. That should send a message that people want fair redistricting, not gerrymandering shenanigans. So lastly, if legislators need a little bit more encouragement, I would love to invite them to investigate our already functioning nonpartisan redistricting process. All 72 counties create redistricting committees. They work with municipalities to create and recommend sensical local districts based off of census data. So that means local government already has the skills and tools to get the job done in a fair way with plenty of input from the community in the form of public hearings. So work with us, we would love that. We want to ensure our communities are fairly represented by people who want to work for all of us. Thank you so much for giving me a little bit of time today.
Thank you, Mayor Rosenberg. Okay, so I am not certain if our second speaker, I think he's having some technical difficulties here. And so I'm getting an update here. Okay, so yes, it is. So so what we'll do here, guys, is we'll kind of pivot a little bit. We're going to go to questions just to start out with. If you guys have any questions here for Mayor Rosenberg, and then if we get, once I get the notification that Barca is here, and then we'll go ahead and start with that. So I guess we can start with the 1st Congressional District. Commissioner Tobias.
Sure, yeah. Hi, thank you, Mayor Rosenberg, for attending this evening. Really appreciate it. I know you had stated the school district there, hasn't had any legislators in attendance, but what is their relationship like with the city, though, and with the different assembly districts and Senate districts?
Yeah, I would say, I know we've been in the middle of a pandemic, but we haven't had anyone visit us yet. Like I said, my state senator did call me a couple of times. So for that, I'm grateful. We've been able to chat, but my representative hasn't shown up to a meeting, hasn't talked to us, hasn't really shared his vision for what we should be doing during this pandemic. So I know that as I was running, I attended a lot of city council meetings, and at one point, my representative did appear there, and he handed out some blue books, so that was great. But that's what I know.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
From the 2nd Congressional District, Commissioner Anthony.
Thank you, Chair Ford. Mayor, what do you suggest we do about gerrymandering? And then how will it change how we elect people here in the state?
Yeah, I would love to see a commission, a nonpartisan commission that can draw these lines. I think people that aren't involved in running for those seats, it's really important that people believe in the integrity of that. So I guess, there's an Iowa model. I think that's interesting. option to investigate. I would love it if legislators or whoever the commission is that is responsible for drawing these state and federal lines would work with the communities, because we already kind of know how people naturally align and how these local districts look, as far as I think that makes sense. And what it means for our elections, I think it means that people have faith that they're choosing their legislator and their legislator isn't choosing them. I think it's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd.
Yeah, hi, Mayor Rosenberg. Thank you for being here. I have kind of a technical question, and I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask at all, but you mentioned something about the county's redistricting process and having committees, which I think is really excellent. And they form the basis, the wards that we kind of use to gather up as we create our districts. In the last redistricting cycle, usually the legislators waited for these wards to be defined by municipalities first, and then used those wards for the districts. That didn't happen the last time. Can you give a comment on how that affected people at the county or municipal level?
Yeah, I gave my my county board chair a call today to ask about that very topic, and he's wary of getting too into the weeds here, but he said that he would much rather be able to work with the legislators on those. It makes more sense when it comes to kind of divvying up those lines if they're able to if they make sense with our districts. I mean, that's what we do on the city side. It's kind of a back and forth discussion. We want to make sure there aren't 14 different ballots for a ward, for instance. So I would definitely invite you to talk to our county board chair and the Marathon County Board. He probably knows a little bit more about that. I wasn't around during the last go around, but he did say that there's a desire to work more closely with the state when it comes to the redistricting opportunity here.
Thanks.
Commissioner Rangal from the 4th.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ford. Thank you, Mayor Rosenberg. I really appreciate you being here. My question is probably a question some of the other commissioners are thinking, because I feel like it always comes up in our hearings, and that's the question around communities of interest. So as a commission, I think one of the most challenging things that we will have to do when it comes to actually drawing the maps is identifying particular communities of interest. And so as mayor, I'm sure you know your city, but maybe the surrounding area relatively well. Are there any particular communities of interest that aren't necessarily political boundaries that we should, in your particular area, pay attention to or make sure that we don't split up? I mean, we've heard something as specific as like school districts and or like areas around a particular lake in the past. Does anything come to mind for your city or area around particular communities of interest?
Yeah, I think it probably makes sense when I'm thinking specifically about the school district. I mean, that is a very obvious one for me. But, we have neighbors that are more urban that have been kind of cut out from our district while the rural areas have been added. So I don't know if they feel like they're as represented by their representatives either. So, when I walk out of my house, I can definitely smell the farms, but I'm in a city. So I think that it makes sense to keep the city together with the other cities and maybe the villages. So I guess that's the community of interest, I would say.
Thank you. Commissioner Ram from the 5th.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Rosenberg. One of our key goals during this exploratory phase of our work is to bring in as many diverse voices and inputs as we possibly can get. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit with us about how you went about sort of the strategies you used to foster that idea of common interest with the referendums that you did in order to, sort of bring the tent together, if you will, of those people to vote positive for the referendum, and if there's some strategies that we might be able to learn from.
Sure. So we didn't have the referendum in Marathon County, but Lincoln County did. They're just north of us. And I'm sure, I know you have already heard from Hans Breitenmosher. I don't know how you couldn't, but he did a really great job. You know, he is a farmer and he has the ability to bring people in, and he was able to talk about fairness. I don't think anybody wants to participate in a system that is flawed, to already have that person representing you. You want to be able to have a competitive race about ideas and talk about all of the things that matter. So that's important. You know, when I think about the stuff that we're doing in Wausau to bring more people in to participate, we're holding listening sessions about things all the time, and we go to specific communities. Our population is 11% Hmong. We make sure to go to those spaces to hear from people. So I think you're doing the right things. I would love to see all my neighbors here in this. I'm sorry I missed the 7th CD version, but you know, it's been a little crazy around here.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Prentice from the 6th.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Rosenberg. First of all, I love your sweater. As a librarian, I'm a connoisseur of cardigans and a cat lover. So also, Commissioner McClellan kind of got at my question, which happens sometimes, but I did want to just pivot that a little bit and ask for any input or insight you have on ways that we as a commission can work more closely with counties or municipalities to make sure that, you know, we're incorporating sort of their visions for wards and maps and that sort of thing, and they don't feel like they've been kind of brushed aside like they did in 2011.
Totally. I thought maybe I was going to get away with people thinking this was polka dots, but you called me out. I guess I would say you've probably talked to folks from the Wisconsin Counties Association. They have a pretty good relationship with most of the counties here. But, you know, I think that they would welcome an opportunity to offer feedback, whether that's asking from the county board chairs. I know that my county board chair feels passionately about this because I called just for a quick question and we ended up talking for 20 minutes about the whole process, and how he was concerned about the census data not coming in on time and us getting the 60 days and all of that. So I think that I'm sure they would welcome that. There's legislative exchange I'm sure you know about. So there's that really intimate relationship that counties specifically have with the state. And so I think this is a natural opportunity to get closer together instead of dividing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bissonnette from the 7th.
Hey, great. Well, thank you. I just have one follow-up question from the previous two. And you don't have to answer it now, but what I'm wondering is if you do have contacts of like organizations that you've worked with in the past that we could reach out to. You mentioned Hans, which I've been a part of a meeting with those folks, which was really informative. But I'm hoping that maybe if you have other things, and again, you don't have to answer this now, but if you could send an email to someone, that way we can make sure that we're trying to get a broad view of folks.
Totally. I will definitely send an email follow up. I know that the Farmers Union has been very active, and that's really how the county board heard from people. The last time around was the Farmers Union, which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Phillips from the 8th.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Rosenberg. Two quick comments and then a question. One, I'm really enjoying the questions we're hearing tonight from the commissioners. I think it reflects a deeper level now of education and understanding since we've been through this process for several months now. So it's great to hear. And two, I think already from you tonight, we've heard great information on where to get feedback as we start to draw some maps to mayors like yourself in the county. So thank you. But the question, if you could just expand a little bit more. You say your city and county are very divided currently. I think you said 3 senators, 5 assemblies. I don't know if you were referring to the county, but could you give a little history on that of here it is now versus what it was prior to gerrymandering, if you know that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's transformed over my lifetime. I would say, you know, for the majority of my life, I was represented in the federal government by Congressman Dave Obey. And all the way down the line, we had folks, we had Senator Russ Decker, we had Assembly people, Donna Seidel and Mandy Wright and Greg Huber, John Robinson, another former mayor. So it's been kind of interesting to see the shift from being represented by all Democrats to now we are represented by all Republicans. And I suppose you can attribute some of that maybe to the shift in population. We know that demographics are changing, but also it's, you know, the district that represents the city, the 85th district, had been very reliably Democrat. And that's not to say that had to be that way. I think competitive races are great, but now it's reliably Republican, I would say. And even in a district that elected somebody like me, who's kind of progressive and a little bit different ideas about how government should run, you know, it's shifted. And even just that little shift of pulling in various townships instead of other townships has shifted it a bit. So, you know, we've largely had, and I guess I should mention that some of the Democrats that represented us were quite moderate. I think you could look at Russ Decker and you could say he could go either way, or Senator Roger Bresky on the other side, he was very moderate. I think he was even a Republican before he was a Democrat. So, but now we definitely have people who are much more partisan, and these are the ideas that are being discussed.
Thank you.
Yep. I didn't realize I was going to be quizzed here, so thank you, keeping me on my toes.
Well, I'll give you a softball before we, because I believe Secretary Barca just got here, but so it'll be more of a selfless plug as well as a question. So we have these events that are coming up that we're trying to get started with the MGGG lab. They're called Train the Trainer events, which we're trying to reach out to people, the members of the community, to draw where they think that the respective lines should be at. I know that you said, you know, there may be a split between the urban and the rural areas in your community as well. You know, do you know of any groups that we should be reaching out to, or any specific organizations in your area that we can promote such events to?
Yeah, maybe that's something I could also follow up in that email. I'll send you a whole list of those groups. We have tons of great interest groups and people that want to do good.
Awesome, Mayor Rosenberg. Thank you very much. And you know, I'll postpone your quiz for now. Great. So our second presenter is the Wisconsin Department of Revenue Secretary Peter Barca, who is actually a native of Kenosha, which is in the 1st Congressional District. Secretary Barca was first elected to the Wisconsin Legislature in 1984, where he served until he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1993. After returning to the state legislature in 2009, he became Wisconsin Assembly's minority leader when the last redistricting occurred in 2010. Secretary Barca, I'm glad that you made it here, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'll turn it over to you right now.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Christopher, and terrific to be with all of you. And I want to start just by thanking each and one of you for serving as commissioners on this very important initiative that Governor Evers put forward. And, you know, I can't think of anything more important to our democracy than making sure that you have nonpartisan redistricting. And I say that for so many reasons. Obviously, you can see issues that have tremendous support amongst the public that never make it through the legislature. You can see I could tell you of legislators that don't even bother calling people back from the other party because they figure, what's the point? They can't possibly elect somebody from that party. And just the very notion that in a system like America that from its very inception wanted to have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we're a long way from that at this juncture. And you see it in Washington, frankly, you see it in the State House, and it's even spilling over in local government, which is so sad. And so I just think it is so vitally important as somebody who went through the last partisan gerrymandered approach, that I was involved in the court suits all the way up to the Supreme Court, where I sat next to John Kasich, who I had served with in the U.S. House, and behind former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was very much a bipartisan effort going to the Supreme Court, because you have Wisconsin, which had been gerrymandered very strongly on the Republican way. And there was a lawsuit from Maryland, who had been a state that had been gerrymandered very strongly the Republican way. And personally, I don't think either is correct. I think we really want to have as many competitive districts as possible, as Mayor Rosenberg just said. So you have the clash of ideas. And I guess you could say I'm relatively ancient, because all the people she mentioned from the Wausau area, from Congressman Obie I served with in the Congress, going back all the way to Mayor Robinson, who I served with in the legislature, to Russ Decker, to Judge Huber, and so many others. So I've been through 3 different redistrictings throughout my career, and I've had a pretty long career, both in government, in the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. And it just seems to me that as a citizen and someone that has been around a long time in every sector, it's just so vital to our democracy that we draw lines that create competitive districts, so that people have to worry not just about losing a primary, but they have to worry about losing a general election, so that the public's, the will of the public can actually become the law of the land, as I'm sure you've heard is written on the ceiling of the governor's conference room that's been there for generations. And so that's why I'm so thankful for what you're doing. And I'm pleased to be here to share my story. And what I'll try to do is give you a thumbnail sketch of some issues that involving the state, and then involving the 1st Congressional District. I understand you want information about that. And then allow plenty of time for dialogue if you want me to go into more detail on any of these issues. But, as one of the commissioners, I think Melissa had referenced, in the last go round, and when redistricting occurred, it was done, obviously strictly by the Republicans. It was done in private. It wasn't even done in the Capitol. It was done at Michael Best's law firm. And as a matter of fact, as you're probably aware, Republican legislators, when they went in to see their plan, literally had to sign a secrecy oath, saying they would not disclose to anybody what was in this redistricting plan. Well, I can't think of anything less democratic than that, because obviously the people are the ones that should have a say in this. And, as the saying goes, which many of us have used time and time again, and that's that citizens should choose their political leaders, not politicians choosing the people that they're going to represent. I mean, it's just so fundamental to our democracy. But after bringing this plan out of secret, they had a hearing, and I think they gave the public, if I'm not mistaken, I think only 48 hours notice that this hearing would take place. They passed it a couple days later through one house, the following week in the other house. So the whole intent was to squash public comment and ensure that the public was not involved in drawing these maps. And of course, as you're well aware, today, because of technology, you can draw them with the most precision ever. So, I mean, that's what's changed. And in that case before the Supreme Court, as the attorneys had articulated, it's far different than it would have been 20, 30, 40 years ago. Almost, 30 years ago is when I was involved in the first redistricting, where, you didn't have even computers to aid you in drawing these lines. And as you all know, this time around, they didn't even use aldermanic districts or county board district lines or ward lines. They use census tract information. Well, that allows you to make it even more precise, to make sure that you can make it so that it's virtually impossible. And as has been documented many times, much of the press has covered that you've had elections where, myself as a former Assembly Minority Leader, where you've had Democrats get over, 62, 63% of the vote, and the Republicans got 63% of the representation in the state assembly. And frankly, if we drew the lines, if we wanted to be, that precise and that, I would say nefarious to draw them, I could draw them the same way. It's not very difficult at all. But that's where I think it's so important to have a People's Commission, such as all of you, to come up with lines so that you do have fairness. It's not any better if Democrats do this type of partisan districting than it is if Republicans do. So, and that's why it's just so vitally important. You know, in Wisconsin, it's been said, and actually I would say proven, that we have, you know, one of the most, and perhaps the most partisan maps ever drawn before. We had an expert from the UW system, Ken, I'm blocking on his last name at the moment, but that, you know, had put together data to prove that. We worked very closely with the nonpartisan and very acclaimed Brennan Center, who had, you know, legal experts that testified at various points in the legal cases, that in fact, that is a case, that it was just so incredibly partisan, you know, drawn in such an amazing partisan manner. And that's why, again, it's so important. So let me shift now to the 1st Congressional District and the Kenosha and Racine area that I represented for many years, both in Congress and in the legislature, and talk about how, you know, the very fundamental principle that is supposed to guide districting and redistricting is having community of interest, and how that was so violated down in this region of the state. You know, for generations, Kenosha County and Racine County essentially had their own state senator. At one time in Wisconsin, you had state senators elected by counties, but when it was changed to, so you would have one person, one vote, you know, Racine and Kenosha County had, you know, state senators that largely, you know, the populations weren't exact, so it wasn't exact, but roughly it was. And they were very competitive districts, especially Racine. Kenosha County had Democrats probably for the last 40 years, but many of those races were very close. In Racine, you had the opposite. You went from, you know, and you could go back quite a ways, but you had like Joe Stroll, who was a Democrat, get defeated by George Petak, who was a Republican, who got defeated by a Democrat, Kim Plotke, who was defeated by a Republican. I think it was Kathy Stepman. I may have my sequence a little bit out of order, but you get the idea. Who was defeated by a Democrat. John Lehman, who was defeated by a Republican. Senator Van Wangard, who was defeated by John Lehman, a Democrat, and then went back to Senator Van Wangard after redistricting. So you can see how I mean, that's democracy. The seat was a 50-50 type of district. You know, each election was a little bit different, whether it was presidential or non-presidential. And as a consequence, the will of the people really did speak loudly. But in addition to those state Senate seats, which were drawn so that the Racine seat, what used to be the Racine seat, was a horseshoe going around the 2 urban districts. And the Kenosha seat brought in 2 very Democratic areas, the city of Kenosha, city of Racine, to be a district that no Republican could possibly win. I mean, absent somebody perhaps shooting somebody on 5th Avenue or committing some other felony, it would be virtually impossible for a Republican to win that seat, as it would be virtually impossible for a Democrat to win a seat that is virtually all rural and circled the 2 urban areas. And in the legislature, for really for a couple generations, from the first time I was elected, then I left, as was mentioned, to go to Congress, to then join the Clinton administration, to then go back into private industry for about 15 years before I came back to the legislature. It used to be that you had the districts drawn, you know, east of the I and respecting the county lines. In fact, there was an old state senator, Joe Andrea, that was in office for many years. And when redistricting came up in the 90s, and then again in 2000, and then again in 2010, he passed away. But he used to say, well, he'd say to us, legislators would say, well, they can't do much to us down here because they can't move us south into Illinois. They can't put us in Lake Michigan to the east. So there's really not much that can be done. Well, he passed away before he could see what was done, because they no longer respected lines. And so my district, which, so when I was first elected, the district I represented basically went from the center of the city of Kenosha down 60th Street to KR, County Line Road, and from I-94 to the lake. The district on the south side, which back then Mayor Andranium at the time was in the legislature, went from Green Bay Road, which separated rural and urban at that time, to the lake, and from the state line to the middle of the city of Kenosha on 60th Street. So, you know, just visually looking at the districts, they look like squares and rectangles, and, you know, they look like what you would expect if you're trying to represent a community of interest. To a district that I just represented prior to joining the administration as Secretary of Revenue, the seat that Representative McGuire represents now, looks like a Nike swish. I mean, it literally goes from the far south end of Kenosha, primarily around the city of Kenosha, a little bit of the city of Kenosha, and the village of Summers goes into Mount Pleasant. And, you know, it's primarily a suburban type district. And I think the hope was as more people moved in from Illinois, maybe that could eventually become Republican. But what they did is they made districts that had always been 2 Democrats in the urban districts in Kenosha, 2 Democrats in the urban districts were seen, and then 2 Republicans, which had the rural districts, which sounds a little bit like it was gerrymandered, but they were at least community of interest. And then when they were scrambled to absolutely ensure that you would have 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans as opposed to 4 Democrats and 2 Republicans. But more important than that even is the fact that the district I represented, you know, crossed, you know, village lines unnecessarily, city lines unnecessarily, and crossed those county lines. We used to joke when I was growing up that we had 2 Berlin walls, one between Kenosha and Racine, which was KR, and one between the urban part of Kenosha County and the rural part, which was I-94. And literally, very few people ever went, you know, from Kenosha would go west of 94 to shop or, you know, for any kind of even cultural activities. And same thing between Kenosha and Racine County. You know, there was competitiveness because, you know, school districts with sports teams, but also more important than that is representing both communities and knowing them both so well now. You know, what I can tell you is there's different interests. I mean, even different, you know, there's a medical society for Kenosha, a medical society for Racine, there's labor groups for each community. So, you know, where you could efficiently represent one particular county, now you're going to ones in 2 different counties in many cases. But you know, what you learn is that the counties and the communities have very different approaches to the way they tackle different issues. They have different interests. And sometimes there's even competing interests. You know, when there was a marina being developed, or Kenosha and Racine were in competition for what marina was going to be developed and what the market share would look like. More recently, with smart cities, there was literally competition for money between the city of Racine and the city of Kenosha. So legislators are really caught in the middle because they have to represent both districts unnecessarily. And so you can see how the whole intent of having community of interest and people brought together who have common interests is just spread asunder. And I think nowhere is that more evident than in our corner of the state, you know, especially those state Senate seats, because you can see neither one is competitive anymore. The other thing I would say is, you know, one of the other things that happened, the only Republican to vote against the redistricting plan was Representative Samantha Kirkman, because they threw her in with Representative John Steinbrink. So they had to run against each other. Representative Steinbrink was the village president in Pleasant Prairie, which is much more of an urban area. And Representative Kirkman had the rural part west of I-94. And it became a, you know, pretty strongly Republican area. So you pretty much knew who was going to win, but Representative Steinbrink took that effort anyway. Many legislators, they were drawn in such a way they didn't bother to run again. You know, Representative Amy Sue Verwing, that's probably the one assembly district that stands out the most for gerrymandering, because where it used to be a tight district that represented, you know, the area just west of Wausau, like in Marshfield and that surrounding area, which was really kind of rural and suburban, became a district that looked like an upside down L that went, you know, between a third and halfway across the state. And, you know, you had to drive 2 hours to get from one end of the district to another. But worse than that isn't the driving time. It's just the idea that you had, you know, you had the western part of the state, which is part of the district, combined with the central part of the state. Well, that's about as different as you can be for an assembly district. And so you can see that, the outcome of this type of partisan, gerrymandering, and primarily, obviously, I wanted to center on the first CD, which is what I was asked to speak on. So maybe I'll end at that point, and I can go into far more detail about any of these issues if you want to know just historically over the 30 years and 3 redistrictings I was part of, or the last one where I was very intimately involved in the legal challenges and went through each, testified in federal court and went all the way up to the Supreme Court where I didn't testify, but obviously there. And so I think I've got a pretty broad-ranged and comprehensive viewpoint of the challenge that lies before you. So again, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate your dedication and commitment to this principle. And as someone who has been a Wisconsinite all my life and someone who will retire in Wisconsin and hope we have children here, hope to have grandkids here, I have a vested interest, not personally, but because I want to make sure my grandchildren grow up in a state that have competitive districts where they can have an influence on what happens in their state. Now more the outcomes of every issue are predetermined. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Secretary Barca. So we'll go ahead and open the floor back up again to questions. This time we'll go reverse order, so we can start on the 8th Congressional District. Tony, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you. That was incredibly informative. Thank you very much. But, I'm going to ask about 2009, 2010. Give us perspective. The Democrats were in control. The story that everybody hears is that they could have passed legislation for nonpartisan redistricting and didn't. What's different now? And are they serious about it? I guess, just to challenge you a little bit. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I appreciate the question enormously, Tony, because you're right. The Democrats were in control of both houses, had the governorship. I was the caucus chair for the Democrats, and I had just come back at that time, and I was elected because nobody there had ever been in the majority. It had been so long since the Democrats had the majority in the assembly, and I had experience in leadership. And what I can tell you about that, there was actually 2 different strains of thought, and even those were split. So there were some that wanted to pass a new redistricting plan immediately upon the Democrats getting the majority. Not to be quite as extreme what the Republicans did, but obviously the lines, had that happened, would have been redrawn in a manner that would have, potentially protected Democrats longer term. There were many of us, myself included, that believe in good government, didn't think it would be right to do that when there was redistricting, was just a couple of years away. And then there were bills. Spencer Black was an advocate of a bill, to use essentially the Iowa model to do what you suggested. And there was a lot of support for that bill, myself included. And Representative Fred Kessler had a plan to change the Constitution to make it so that a certain percentage of districts had to be competitive. And his point would be that if the Constitution changed, then it wouldn't matter, no future legislature, could change it without the people's input. And I'll tell you what happened. So first of all, we didn't get to these issues to the second year and near the end of the year. You might say, why is that? Well, first of all, we had never had this type of there were a couple of things. First of all, we'd had the worst economic calamity we had had since the Great Depression at that time. So our backs were against the wall. Many people were unemployed. Many businesses were on the brink of closing. And it was just a very difficult period. So the priority was much more initially those first 6 months. Let's get through some economic change legislation and let's make sure we protected businesses and individuals during this critical period. And so that's part of why there wasn't as much of a focus on this. Then secondly, the Democrats had a 3-vote margin. And, one of them was Representative Ziegelbauer, who just switched parties a year or so later. So he rarely voted with the Democrats. He voted with Republicans even more than we did. You had a couple other legislators that on any given day would vote with the Republicans. You had some extremely conservative Democrats that, you know, we couldn't even get the votes to change certain election law types of changes to make it easier for people to vote because our caucus was so split. So, and there was also a big split between should we pass the Spencer Black bill or should we pass the Kessler constitutional change? I can tell you for the record, I was for doing both. I didn't see them as being mutually exclusive. You could have changed Constitution and have done that, but I can tell you we certainly didn't have the votes to do that. And frankly, we didn't have the votes to do either one of them because again, our caucus was so, first of all, such a narrow majority, and it was very split on these kinds of issues. So as a consequence, we caucused for hours and hours in that second year of our 2-year term, attempting to get something passed. And I would say most of us that were on the Democratic Assembly leadership team, you know, would say if we had to choose one or the other, we would have taken the Black plan versus the constitutional change. Although personally, I was strongly an advocate for that too, because if you in fact make it as Representative Kessler wanted to do, so that whoever drew the maps, you had to have a certain percent, I can't remember, but it's easy enough to look up that bill, that resolution to change the Constitution. I think it was something like 15 or 20% of the districts had to be competitive. Well, that would limit this kind of partisan mischief that occurred, not just in Wisconsin and other states as well. But we simply did not have the votes. Not only did we not have a consensus, we just didn't have the votes to pass either one. So that was a problem, why that didn't get done when the Democrats were in the majority. Does that answer your question, Tony?
You know, it sure does, and I really appreciate your perspective. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
All right, Commissioner Bissonnette.
Yes, thank you, sir. I absolutely appreciate your depth of experience and history. I'm a huge history buff. What I'm wondering, you had mentioned that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you mentioned you've gone through three different redistricting cycles. What I'm curious about, in your opinion, has there ever been a redrawing or a drawing of a map that makes sense? Like one that isn't, you know, going one way or going the other way, but is there in your memory, in the state of Wisconsin, has there ever been a map that makes sense?
Well, I would say this, yes. I mean, first of all, you know, the first two redistrictings I went through in 1990 and 2000, you know, the courts drew the maps. And, you know, generally speaking, I mean, not as much today as you had back then, but back then you very much had judges that viewed their role as very nonpartisan and just trying to do the right thing. And I think you would see if you looked at the maps that were drawn by the courts and, you know, that they were, you know, relatively even keeled. And, you know, generally speaking, I think did look at community of interest. They didn't consider whether it be Democrats or Republicans necessarily that would have the majority, but they kind of looked at each county. They looked at what communities had done. They looked at historical data and put together those maps. So I think that, you know, they were certainly much better than what you see reflected today, especially in states where you have them drawn in a partisan manner. And again, whether it's Democrats in Maryland or, you know, Illinois or Republicans last time in Wisconsin, that's just the way it's worked historically. So, you know, I think those court drawn maps were far better, frankly, than what legislators had drawn. And it's ironic because I'll tell you something, back in the 80s when I was here, I would have had a different position. I would have felt that, you know, legislators were elected to do this job and they should do the job. And why do you need any sort of outside commission? But when I was in the legislature in the 80s, you know, Democrats controlled everything for a big portion of the period. When I first got there, Tony Earl, not Evers, was governor. the Democrats control both, both the Assembly and the Senate. And, but, most of the bills I passed during that period were bipartisan bills. I mean, I wanted Republican support. I always felt, and I was a leader for almost my entire tenure, I think, in the legislature, other than my first 2 terms. I always felt that, you'd have more of the will of the people if you kind of work together as best as possible to pass things. And I also thought it would be more sustainable, because then you wouldn't have a new governor and new legislature and undo everything that was just done, which we saw, which we've seen happen much more so, of course, in the course of the past decade or so. So I just would have never thought it was necessary. But we also didn't have this kind of computer precision before either, where you could draw them in such a manner where you can just about assure what the outcome is going to be. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, sir.
And Mayor Rosenberg, I agree, another fine Wausau alum. I would even go as far as say legendary. He was a DNR secretary, he was a majority leader in the legislature, terrific governor, and just a wonderful person, human being.
Awesome. Commissioner Prentice from the 6th.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Barca. My question for you is, you touched a little bit on communities of interest and the concept of competitiveness, and something that's come up in my recent conversations with folks that are involved in the Fair Maps Coalition and other community groups is the tension between accounting for communities of interest and this concept of competitiveness. We've heard a lot from the public testimony that competitiveness is important. And there's definitely a perception that that is at odds with accounting for communities of interest. So I wondered if you could just speak to that a little bit and how we should maybe be thinking about that and answering those concerns from the public when they come up.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it. And I think it's an excellent question. I think that, and there's no question that it's a different culture we have today, a different approach that people take to politics. Most of which I would say is not positive. But going back to, let's use the 1st Congressional District example that I cited. You certainly had community of interest back then, in the sense that you had Kenosha County and Racine County had their own state senators. Districts are drawn, rural and urban, and for the most part trying to keep, villages and cities wherever possible in 1 district versus 3. And you have plenty of competitiveness. I mean, it isn't like today. I mean, you could run for the state assembly. I think the first state assembly seat I ran for, I think I spent like $9,000, and that seemed like a lot of money to me. Now, as a Democratic leader, I mean, we had to spend hundreds of thousands. In this last election, there's $1 million I think spent in an assembly district, which, I guess that gets into Citizens United and how corrupt I think that is. And that'd be the twin part of what's wrong with democracy today. But I would say redistricting is even more important. But I would say that when you have those community of interests, and I'll speak directly to what I think people are saying. Well, if you have the city of Kenosha together, that's more Democratic. And if you have rural Kenosha County, that's more Republican. So you're not getting as much competitiveness. But I think that's changing, particularly with suburbs now looking at things differently. And I think you're seeing a breakdown in sort of the historical partisan nature that you once had. So I think that's sort of correcting itself to some degree. So I really believe you can have both. And I think if you look back at some of those court drawn maps, and if you're able to hear from others besides just myself, like, go back to Mayor Rosenberg and, bring in, John Robinson, Tony Earl, if you can get Governor Earl on the line, people that have been around a long time, on the Republican side, someone like Brian Rood, who's state senator on the Republican side for many years, Dale Schultz, these are people that are institutionalists that care more about democracy than they care about their party. And if you bring them together and they give you some more historical information, I think you'll find that it's not as difficult as you might think.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rand from the 5th.
Great, thank you so much. Could you give us some insight on what you expect we may experience from the legislature this year as they approach drawing the maps?
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, we're not politicians, so any other political advice you may have for us as we enter this process?
Well, one thing I'd say is expect the unexpected, because just like we were so shocked when they brought forward these maps and had a hearing 2 days later and passed them a couple days after that, I think you're going to see, some surprising things that'll come forward. I mean, my biggest fear would be that they would attempt to cut the governor out of the process and attempt to do it through a resolution and go to court and see if they can get our Supreme Court, that generally speaking, in virtually almost every decision after every decision, tends to go along with what the Republican majority wants. So that would be my biggest fear, is that they would attempt to do that. I certainly hope that's not the case. But absent that, then it's a little bit more difficult to project what they might do, because knowing that, the governor would certainly veto it if they try and do some extreme partisan map again. It's hard to know whether or not they might try to come up with something that looked a little bit more reasonable. So at least using geometry, it doesn't look so ridiculous, like having Nike swishes like my district, or upside down L's like former Representative Fruwink had, and many others. At least that looks better on the surface. I mean, I know reading some of the past Supreme Court justice decisions, that's been something that's influenced them. And they said it didn't pass the smell test, although I think they meant it didn't pass the visual test. But I think they looked at those kinds of things. So you could see something like that emerge. Hard to tell exactly. But there's no question that when it comes to redistricting, it's very much a very partisan issue, right? Because it's, you have, Democrats, you have Republicans, and frankly, even look at it from the standpoint of independence. I mean, Wisconsin had a very strong progressive party for many years. And, even though we historically in America have always been a two-party system, and I'm not opposed to that personally, but I am sympathetic to, the fact that you have a Libertarian Party, you have a Green Party, and you have others that they have interests as well that should be taken into account, so that it's not just that Democrats and Republicans could potentially win. I could see another progressive party emerging in Wisconsin. So I think that's another element that would be well worth looking at. And, that might lead you again to historical data. But on the political side, what I can tell you is that, I mean, typically you almost never have a Democrat vote for a Republican map or a Republican vote for a Democratic map, just because there's so much at stake in terms of who's going to represent your constituency. But what is totally unacceptable is when you have issues like take Medicaid in Wisconsin, expansion in Wisconsin, which I've described as, I think, one of the worst policy decisions in a generation, just because now I think you got something like 42 states that have done it. 70-some% of Wisconsinites want to see that done, and their legislature won't do it. Or take something like background checks for people being able to purchase dangerous weapons to keep them out of the hands of felons or criminally insane people. There you've got 85% of the public that wants that done, and yet you can't pass it. Well, at the end of the day, the reason why we have a government is to do the will of the people, so that those things that the public feel are compelling and necessary, that somehow through their elected representatives they can get done. And so it's a huge problem when you've got issues of that type of support that are so clear, there's nothing complicated about those issues, and they can't pass.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rangal.
Yeah, thank you so much for everything. It's been a real good history lesson, and I'm a big fan as a history government teacher, so I really enjoyed it. I will say I'm a little bit younger, so a lot of those names you were throwing out went over my head. But my question has to do with transparency. So I think one advantage we have is relative to the last redistricting process, which lacked a lot of transparency. We've emphasized that as a commission, and looking forward to when we're actually drawing the maps, we want to make sure that process is as transparent as possible, knowing we have different political opinions on this commission, but we all wholeheartedly agree it should be nonpartisan. What would you recommend, either from like someone who has spent a lot of time within government and you know what transparency looks like or doesn't, but also just as a citizen of Wisconsin, right? What would you look for us to do as a commission to be as transparent as possible during the actual map drawing process?
Well, I think having, public meetings like this where you invite the public to, weigh in is just vitally important. Secondly, I think if you are successful in producing maps that you can argue are nonpartisan in nature and allow for a lot of competitiveness amongst various parties, and if it allows for community of interest, I think you should have public hearings and allow the public to come in and weigh in on these individual lines by moving around the state, but also even on the process and on people being able to weigh in terms of the state as a whole and how that map would factor into their thinking. I think that's one of the more important things that you could do, and I think that does create transparency. And again, I don't want to sound Pollyannish about it, but I, in a way, I guess maybe I am. I still am an idealist. After all this time, I've served in government and public service, and I've also been in the private sector too. But I truly believe you need a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And you don't have that unless they can weigh in. And what's happening in the legislature, and I'll try not to go off too much on a tangent here, but I think it's inextricably related to what you're talking about. I mean, right now, it used to be, and again, I'm going to sound ancient again, but before computers, to have a public hearing, you had to mail out notices to every library in the state. So you couldn't surprise people and have hearings with 1 or 2 days notice. There had to be plenty of time for it to be posted and people to see it and be able to come forward to Madison to petition their government so that they could weigh in on policy changes. That doesn't happen anymore. And in fact, you've had some people argue when you say, well, why are you doing this with 2 days notice? You've had people say out loud publicly, it's unbelievable. They would say things like, well, they all have lobbyists, or lobbyists get the notices. And it's like, wait a second, poor people don't have lobbyists. Ordinary citizens don't have lobbyists. This is not supposed to be, a government of and by and for the special interests. It's supposed to be for the people. So technology, as wonderful as it is, and in a way it allows for more transparency so people can get documents online, and that part is all fantastic. But the idea, and going back to Act 10, where open meetings laws were clearly violated, the law is very clear. The legislature in writing it said hold the legislature accountable, but unfortunately we went to our Supreme Court, one of the worst decisions ever. They said, well, the legislature, essentially, this is what their ruling said. The legislature essentially is free to ignore any law, because when they don't follow the law, they're essentially repealing that law. Well, that's not how laws are repealed. The repeal law, it's got to pass both houses of the legislature, be signed by the governor, but more importantly, the public has to consent to that. They have to say they want that law changed, because what we do is supposed to reflect what the people want to have done. And that is so lost today, it's absolutely remarkable. And so I just think it's so vital that you give plenty of notice for these hearings whenever you're going to have them, and publish them, to whatever degree you can, a couple of weeks in advance, so people can get off of work and come in and let you know their thoughts. And I think that would be remarkable just because of how unique that would be today.
Thank you. Commissioner McClellan from the 3rd.
Thanks. Hi, Mr. Barca. This has been a very interesting conversation, and the fact that you've lived through 3 redistricting is a wonderful resource for us to understand your point of view. Outside of gerrymandering, which when we redistrict, we know all the downside of gerrymandering itself. Are there any other considerations about redistricting that's affected you? I can think of, like, say, incumbents. If you could take incumbents out of their district while you're redistricting, might be in effect intentional or non-intentional. Can you think of other things that affected you? And what do you think about a rule that would disallow taking incumbents out of their district?
Well, I don't think that you can protect incumbents so that they're stay in their district, quite frankly, and I don't think you should. I mean, I think that the issue should be community of interest. I mean, as much as I represented the 64 district for, for so many years, both in my first tenure and then came back, and it was still at the same number, which oftentimes doesn't happen. But that wasn't my seat. That belonged to the people of, of this area. And, so I just don't think you can, I mean, I don't think you should go out of your way to take incumbents out of their district, nor do I think you should go out of your way to keep them in their district. It should be community of interest. I'll tell you what affected me personally. So I grew up in the town of Summers, and, it's back when I grew up, it was like 3,000 people. Now it's about 7,500. And so the north side of the city of Kenosha, as long as we've had enough sufficient population, which came about because of American Motors, quite frankly. When American Motors was created as an auto company, Kenosha, doubled in population over, I think, about a 10 or 15 year period of time, as many people gravitated to Kenosha, many from the South, Mississippi and Alabama. And during that era in the 50s, 60s, jobs were tight down there, and jobs for unskilled people were plentiful here, much like my father was an immigrant, came to America because they couldn't afford training. He was one of 12 kids, and there were opportunities here. Well, people move around America for that reason too. And so when we had two districts, you always had sort of a north side, south side district. And the town of Summers I grew up in was always in the north side. And so when I left the legislature, went to Congress, joined the Clinton administration, went and ran a nonprofit, then ran a business I eventually bought, traveled the world, came back, and I wasn't paying much attention to the lines. It was a fluke I came back to the legislature. I had no intention of running. In fact, I was like, there's like 18 hours left, and I had all these people in my dining room saying, "You got to run. We really need you to come back." And they couldn't find anybody they thought could win the district. And the only reason I say that is I didn't even know what the lines were at the time. I knew roughly, but the town of Summers I grew up in always was part of the North Side District. So I was just shocked to find out that there was only essentially one main road that went along the lake that was in, the town of Summers. That essentially they had drawn the maps in such a way that, the town of Summers was taken out of there. Now, that just seemed ridiculous to me. Why would you have a town at that point might have been 6,000, have 300 people in one town there? So, you can see, and people were very irritated with the partisan districting maps that were drawn. I know the people of Beloit were very upset because historically they always have one legislator representing the city of Beloit, and that was split in half. I know Sheboygan, always have one legislator. And this isn't it's because of natural geographic boundaries. Beloit was in my congressional district. It borders Illinois. So again, you couldn't go to the south. So it was just sort of natural you would keep that town together. Sheboygan has Lake Michigan to the east. So, for good reason, you have one legislator representing that district. So I know public officials like mayors, county board members, city council members, they were just furious that their town was divided in half. They no longer could, bring their concerns because, in Beloit, it's divided in such a way. So, again, they had, the concerns that they have would be diluted by the fact that they're just, the city of Beloit isn't that large comparatively. So they were only a third of people's districts. So again, you can sort of see that consideration where communities, for the most part, you ought to try to keep communities in the same district as much as possible, not split townships and villages and cities in half where it's not possible now. With only 99 districts, it's not always possible, but you do the best you can.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anthony.
Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you.
Great to see you again, my friend.
Yeah. Hey, so, everybody, lots of people know that for the sake of our democracy, we have to break down this gerrymandering in the state. And I think that this group is going to put together a very neutral and fair map. But I wonder even if we do that, I wonder if there is a political path forward. I wonder what the map has to look like to be advanced and accepted politically. Republicans have both houses. The Dems have the executive office. Is there a path forward, and what does a map have to look like for it to even have a chance of moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, under ordinary times and the way America, I mean, if you go back historically, I mean, typically speaking, maps, and that's where I don't think the Republicans can be successful by doing this by resolution. I'd be surprised if they were able to do it because it was always a legislative and gubernatorial process. And so the issue is that whenever you have divided government, like we have now again in Wisconsin with a Democratic governor, Republican legislature, it always ended up in a court. So if you do your job well and you draw a very compelling map, I think there's little doubt that if it ends up that the courts draw the map, they'll be looking to your map for guidance. And, obviously the way it would happen is that there'll be a hearing before a court and, somebody, perhaps one of you or an attorney representing you will go forward and testify and outline the process you used and why you think this map represents, what the law calls for and what the spirit of the law calls for, which is to have these community of interests and to have democracy back again. And any fair-minded judge, I believe, would look at that and say, well, they may not take your map in whole, but I would think in large part, they would say, well, let's use this at least as a basis, or let's at least take, key parts of what this nonpartisan commission put together. And then I think the other thing that courts historically again now have weighed, are groups like the League of, Women Voters or, Common Cause or all these good government groups that are nonpartisan in nature. And they, in all likelihood, I would suspect would come and support your maps and say, look, this is about as fair a process we've ever had. You've got people that, did it right from a process standpoint, went about this in earnest, and all the criteria that, courts have always looked to are represented in this map. So that's the way I would suspect that this would, weigh in and come to pass there, Anthony.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Anthony, I say Ruben. Ruben's wife works for us. We love her to death. So I have a big debt to him.
Awesome. And Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you, Chair Ford, and thank you, Secretary Barca, for being here and for just giving so much information. And so I just thank you. And also, I don't have any questions. Commissioner Anthony really took mine. It was just a perfect question because I was just so curious as to what we could do or, what that path forward is. So, thank you again for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, great minds think alike. So see, you both must have been on the right track.
Well, I'll piggyback on that and would say, I had a variant of that question as well. But I was looking through my notes from your presentation, Secretary Barca, and one thing that you talked about was kind of reaching out to some of the retired representatives as well. And one of the two of the names that I wrote down was Brian Root and Dale Schultz. And I think in speaking to some of those individuals, it may go a long way in terms of trying to get more of an entire perspective of the MAPS process in the past. Do you have any other folks in mind that we should speak to, perhaps either from the independent or even the Republican side as well?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Dan Thino, I think, has been very outspoken in recent, former state senator has been very outspoken recently. I don't know specifically on this topic, but just on, topics of public interest and someone who was, well regarded. Representative Rosenzweig, Peggy Rosenzweig, was a state legislator from the suburban Milwaukee area. So I think you want to kind of go around the state too and try and have people from various parts of the state. And I'd be happy to, when I just take a second look at this, and I could put together a list of people that represent different generations in the legislature too. And I also would consult with some people who would serve long periods of time, like Representative Risser, as you know, is the longest serving state legislator in state history. And, so he's, so while I served through 3 redistricting, I think he served through 5. So, but he also served with so many members. And so you could reach out to people like that serve long periods of time in both parties and ask them for recommendations of people who, you know, they believe would be fair-minded and would want to approach this in a manner of putting together the best maps for Wisconsin. So I think you got Dale Schultz in there too, right? But
but I got him as
or majority leader, and you know, but there's quite a few that served a long time. Some of them. So, but I could, if given a little more thought and going through a few blue books, I could give you a lot more names.
So that'd be great. Thank you, Secretary Barca.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank
you, Mr. Chairman, for chairing this too. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for to you and Mayor Rosenberg for spending time with us tonight and giving us a lot of good background information. We appreciate it. So what we'll do now, guys, so this will formally end our this portion of the hearing. We'll take a short break before we move into the public testimony and hear some more from Wisconsinites of the 1st Congressional District.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you all. And if you have any follow-up questions, happy to answer them. As I've indicated from the onset, I genuinely feel there's very little more important than what you're doing right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary and Mayor.
I didn't wash the lettuce. 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 I Why are they on twice?
Sorry, folks, just 1 second. We're having some technical difficulties.
We will now begin approximately 1 hour of public testimony. The individuals testifying tonight registered ahead of tonight's meeting to testify. As a reminder to tonight's testifiers, this hearing is recorded and being live streamed. Each individual will have 3 minutes to testify to the commission. To ensure the maximum amount of members of the public can address the commission members will not be answering any questions or providing any comments following individuals' testimony. This is a common practice that legislative committees such as the Legislative Committee on Joint Finance follows. Finally, as a reminder, if any members of the public would like to provide comments or feedback to the commission at any point throughout the tenure of the People's Maps Commission initiative, you are encouraged to submit written comments through the public comment form that is available on wisconsin.gov/peoplesmaps. We will now begin the testifying portion of the evening, and the first individual this evening is Susan Adams from the 2nd Congressional District. Susan? Susan? You're unmuted. Susan,
Okay, hi.
Yep, there we go. Yep, good.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm actually from the yes, I'm from Beloit, and it's split. So, and I couldn't come on the March 11th one, so I wanted to come to this one. I was trying to go to the training session. I don't know if you ever actually had it on Saturday, but they were talking about transparency earlier, and that brought to mind.
Is your technology okay? If you have the YouTube going next to you, you should close out of the YouTube. Do you have it streaming near you?
I'm hearing this twice. Okay, I'm hearing it twice. I'm not sure this is working.
We can hear you. I think if you have the streaming going, if you were watching the hearing before.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to get out of it.
Okay, it's like when you would call into a radio station, right?
I did. Sorry. I'm trying to undo it.
No, take your time. It's okay.
Okay.
But we can hear you whenever you're ready, and I'll restart the clock.
Uh-oh. I think I've gotten out of everything.
Are you still hearing? We can hear you.
I can hear you. Okay, I'll just keep going.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anyway, I was wondering about the time. It was up, but it wasn't up until later, and that my invite didn't come in until 10:23. So that you might want to do that a little bit earlier and try and get the information out to people at how they can actually watch live, because it isn't clear on the website. Okay, but the main thing I wanted to talk about was that I think you should keep Beloit whole, just like Barca was talking about. It is very annoying to have two different legislators involved, Amy Lautenbach and Mark Spreitzer. you know, on opposite sides of the aisle, and it doesn't work very well. So we need to make sure that you keep Beloit together, and I think you should keep Janesville together as well. I hope you can still hear me, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. The next individual we have this evening is Timothy Daly from the 1st Congressional District. Timothy?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. I am unmuted, but I don't see myself on the screen yet.
Well, you can, if you would like to go ahead.
Just start the video.
Yep, there you are. Perfect. We'll start your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, you ready? It's interesting. I saw on the green sheet today is a famous anniversary, you know. On February 11th, 1812, 209 years ago, Governor Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts signed the redistricting law into effect. And we know he's famous to this day because we now have gerrymandering. I was a plaintiff, an added plaintiff in the Whitford case, which I'm sure you've all read the entire case, right? It started out with 12 plaintiffs. I see Wayne Jensen, original one, is speaking later. Deb Patel and I were added when they added 28 plaintiffs later after the case came back from the United States Supreme Court. As part of that case, I don't know how much information you have on it, but there was a lot of discovery. My deposition was taken in Milwaukee, as many other people were. I did reference in submitted materials about maps, and I do have our trial maps. I don't know, have any members of the commission seen what were going to be our trial maps at the second trial in the Western District? Those maps were from the secret map room, Robin Voss's famous secret map room. There are 15 individual maps, and there are 10 statewide maps. And those maps show you, if I can hold this up, I don't have a color printer, but these maps show how you can gerrymander. They were going to be used for trial exhibits. The bottom one is the actual map as it is now. The other ones were a couple examples. Now, these maps were drawn by the GOP experts. And I have them for, we were just talking about Beloit, one of our people. We have one for Beloit because of what they did to in Brock County. All of those maps are interesting because it shows you what you can do. I don't know who's going to draw the maps. We had expert witnesses. Obviously, Robin Voss had expert witnesses. Our expert witnesses drew thousands of maps, not a handful of maps, but thousands of maps. And those maps that they used, if you look at these exhibits that we had for trial, you end up, I heard Peter Barca speaking, you end up with slicing and dicing Racine and Kenosha counties the way they did. The 21st Senate, where I live, was the most competitive Senate seat in the state. It flipped 6 elections in a row, back and forth with the parties. Now,
thank you, sir.
It's a solid Republican seat, and plus they picked up the 62nd Assembly in the Caledonia and northern part of the county in Racine as a solid Republican.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim.
That's it?
Yep, you have 3 minutes. And just as a reminder, if there is any more testimony or written feedback that you have, we encourage you to submit it still through the website so that we can make sure the commissioners get that information.
Well, the maps, I don't know if you've seen the maps. Has anyone submitted those maps to the commission?
We encourage you to go ahead and submit those maps just to be on the safe side.
You haven't seen them, I think.
We encourage you to submit your feedback. Thank you. We're still very much in the early stages of the process.
Okay.
The next individual that we have this evening testifying is Susan Sheldon of the 1st Congressional District. Susan?
Hi, I'm a substitute teacher and I often work with special needs teens. And last year I was assisting a student in a social studies class with a lesson on voting and gerrymandering. The textbook covered it pretty well, and the drawings by the teacher covered it even more clearly. What was obvious is that the process of gerrymandering disenfranchises many voters, and the results do not reflect the true balance of the state. In the lesson, the teacher showed the class how they could pack voters with similar political leanings into one small district and then frack or split up the other voters into many districts. The result was obvious. If a state is mostly 50-50 of a party affiliation, much like Wisconsin is, the map designers could use the pack and frack method and the results could be skewed. Interestingly enough, the maps could be skewed in favor of either party. It would just depend on who was drawing the maps and who had the power at the time. With the improvements of algorithms, computer models can be created to virtually guarantee a winning result for one side or the other. This is unfair, undemocratic, and leads to several problems. One, voters begin to feel they have no voice, and they even stop voting. Two, elected officials get too secure, knowing that they will likely and easily get reelected. Three, in packed and fracked districts where the only choice is either a Democrat or Republican, voters often see primaries where the choices are for an extreme far-right candidate or an extreme far-left candidate over a more central candidate. Lately, more and more of the extreme candidates are getting elected. This results that instead of elected officials coming together to find solutions for the good of the state or the country, they just dig in and go to their extreme corners. Because of this, less and less good governing gets done. Solution: use algorithms to create the most balanced maps possible. Results will be better candidates, better representation, better governing with a solution-based approach rather than an adversarial-based approach. Better for the district, better for the state and the country. Thank you.
Good evening. The next individual we have is Stephen Dolder of the 1st Congressional District. Stephen? Oh, you're on mute. There you are.
Good evening. Thank you for doing this and holding these hearings. I've been involved in politics in Walworth County for probably about 5 to 10 years. And one of the things that I noticed is that we have been tremendously gerrymandered, especially in assembly districts. And we have 6 assembly districts in Walworth County, which makes it extremely difficult to organize and even think about running campaigns. Some of them only contain like 8% of the voters in our county. One district has 1 voter in it, and that's it, because Racine County comes into Burlington, the city of Burlington comes into Walworth County. Now, I was very curious. I've been working in the 32nd Assembly District. I live in the 32nd Assembly District, and I'm not sure if I can share screens or not, but I'm just going to kind of explain the problem that we're dealing with when we work in campaigns, especially in Walworth County. We have part of Racine County, just a small part of Racine County in the 32nd, and we also have part of Kenosha County. And so there's 3 different counties represented. We also have school districts that are split. We have some townships that actually have 3 different assembly districts in it. Now, I was curious, and I've been spending a little bit of time researching to try to find out what it was like before the redistrict in 2011 in Walworth County. And I went back and I finally went to a blue book, and I really did find that Walworth County was not split up prior to the redistricting 2011. Every township was intact, and I looked at Walworth County was pretty much split into two different assembly districts, but every single township was kept intact. And Darien and Delavan, for instance, Darien and Delavan is really a consolidated school district. And they actually split that in 2011 into two separate assembly districts, the 33rd and the 32nd. So, you know, there's not a lot of continuity within any of the districts that were drawn in 2011. And I hope we can return to some sensibility. And I think we will get that if we have independent people drawing the maps. And you know, I'm not going to talk about statistics in terms of electability of Democrats and Republicans, because I'm sure the statistics are out there. But if you look at the maps prior to 2011 and now look what they are looking like now, it's just a completely different picture. And it took me a long time to try to find the maps, the historical maps. I finally went to the Blue Book. So again, I want to thank you for doing this. And I hope that we definitely have a independent group drawing the maps. So it makes it a little bit simpler to organize within a county.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Have a good evening. The next individual we have is Scott Clements from the 4th Congressional District. Scott? Scott, are you there?
There we go. There we go. I'm unmuted. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
All right. Improvements to our society and our government processes require a competition of viewpoints and ideas. And for far too long, the congressional district, which surround the Milwaukee area, have been designed to facilitate a specific party gets elected. In general, when we look at the state of Wisconsin, overall, the only congressional district which is remotely competitive is the third congressional district. An indicator of how unbalanced our maps are, just look at now retired Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, who held his seat for 42 years, and Gwen Moore, who has held her seat for 16 years. Jim Sensenbrenner, over his tenure, never faced a serious challenger, and Gwen Moore never faces a serious challenger either. My main suggestion to this committee is that where possible and logical, congressional districts should be drawn in such a way where they are as close to as 50-50 as possible. Specifically in the Milwaukee area, I recommend that a line should be drawn which splits Milwaukee County and Waukesha County right down the middle, and then builds congressional districts north of the line and south of the line. You could use I-94 as that border. My take is that by using this method, we'll bring competition and new ideas to Milwaukee County and Waukesha County, which they have never seen before, as well as new candidates. When it comes to communities of interest, perspective, precedent does exist for this idea before Wisconsin lost its congressional district in the 2000 redistricting. Milwaukee was split in two halves. By drawing districts which are competitive means that the elected representatives will be more responsive to their constituents' needs when it comes to day-to-day help with acquiring government services. Where I live, there's a state representative whose district crosses the 1st CD and 4th CD, and if this rep knows your political leanings or whatever, or if you don't contribute to her campaign, good luck getting this person to respond to one of your requests or phone calls. I also believe in the principle that an incumbent to a seat's current home address should in no way impact the drawing of legislative or congressional district lines. I believe that the principle that a legislative body should not be able to pick their voters and the people of Wisconsin should be drawing logical legislative congressional districts lines that comply with federal and state guidelines. I'm a firm believer that the state of Wisconsin should be working towards implementing ranked choice voting for general elections and whatever in a jungle primary system. My thought process on this is that by taking away the partisan atmosphere of the primaries will drive away the extreme candidates, whatever, from the far left and the far right, and give us more moderate centrist candidates. All the above suggestions which I have provided, I believe, will result in a more balanced and representative government for the people of the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, sir.
That's all that I have.
Thank you. Have a good evening. The next individual we have is Anita Lock from the 1st Congressional District.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for allowing public comment tonight. I think it's a really good thing. I'm a firm believer that every vote should count. As you're aware, referenda and resolutions throughout the state have demonstrated that over 70% of Wisconsin voters want nonpartisan maps. As you're also aware, the severely gerrymandered maps currently in place in Wisconsin have resulted in 50% of voters getting only 36 seats out of 99 in the state assembly. I feel this really has to change. It is not a fair system. I'd like to talk tonight about the impact of representation on voters here in Wisconsin who are in the majority but do not have a voice in our legislature. 3 areas of importance to me and my family are COVID-19, healthcare, and education. Our state legislature should be doing more to help Wisconsinites during the COVID-19 pandemic, but they haven't. Why? Because too many legislative districts are drawn so that elected officials do not represent and are not responsive to their constituents. The basically minority control in the legislature has blocked Governor Evers' efforts at every turn. Similarly, the obstruction of the expansion of Medicare and trying to dismantle the Affordable Care Act has been costly to the state, our citizens, and small businesses, of which we have a family business. In addition, and especially during this pandemic, lack of affordable health care has been a real hardship for our people here in the state. Lastly, the state legislature minority control has also done significant damage to our schools in Wisconsin over these past years. Continued defunding at the state level, capping property taxes at the local level, and supporting voucher schools has hurt the education of my grandchildren and all the children in Wisconsin. In addition, it has also caused untenable debt loads on kids attending our trade schools, our colleges, and our universities. In closing, we need legislative maps that do not divide our communities into partisan voting districts. I support an independent, nonpartisan, and transparent map drawing process for 2021 and going into the future. These public hearings and this commission are a good start. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. The next individual we have is John Scott, but it looks like he might be having some audio difficulties. So we'll come back to him. Maybe we'll come back to him. So we're going to start with Aubrey Langley from the 1st Congressional District. Aubrey?
Hi. All right, so good evening to the commission. I've lived the majority of my life in the village of Pleasant Prairie in Kenosha County. I love Kenosha. I went to elementary, middle, and high school here. I love being from Wisconsin, but because of gerrymandering, I've been cut out and separated from my own community. I live 10 minutes out from downtown Kenosha, but more than 30 minutes from downtown Racine. Despite this, I live in a Senate district that encompasses the majority of Racine and almost none of Kenosha. I turned 28 this year, and as long as I've been able to vote, I've been represented by the same assembly member and the same state senator. Especially recently, I've never felt like I've been represented or that my vote has really mattered at the state level. I've tried calling Senator Wangard and Representative Kirkman's offices and never had my call be picked up or had any kind of follow-up. It's extremely difficult to stay motivated and continue to believe in our democracy when in every election, the same candidates seem to win. At this point, I see the seats that I'm represented by as seats assigned to Republicans. After Mr. Steinbrink lost in 2012, I truly believe people in this area gave up hope of seeing these seats as any kind of competitive. What I'm hoping for from this commission is to be reconnected to my community and represented in Madison. For example, when the special session on policing last year was adjourned in less than 30 seconds, that told me that issues important to me weren't even worth addressing. I want representatives that are incentivized to come here, hear our problems and issues, and be responsive to us, the electors. According to assessments in 2016, 2018, and 2020 by the Electoral Integrity Project, Wisconsin has consistently ranked in the bottom 2 states when it comes to fairness in electoral boundaries. I think fair maps are the way we get to a functioning and responsive state government. All I want is fairness. I want to believe in democracy in Wisconsin again. I wish you all the very best in helping to return democracy to our state. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you. Have a good evening. The next individual is John Scott from the 1st Congressional District. John? John, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Hello, I'm John Scott, and I live in Mount Pleasant, adjoining Racine in the 1st Congressional District. I'm a retired teacher and administrator, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. After the 2011 redistricting, I found my legislative districts had changed. I was now split off from my Racine Assembly District and was in a mostly Kenosha district. My Senate district changed from being contiguous with Racine County to mostly the cities of Racine and Kenosha. Because of these changes, I found myself out of the loop and activities in my home community, and I felt a loss of state representation. While I like my current legislature and they are experienced and well qualified, their experience and connections have mostly not been with my community, and their efforts are diluted by representing 2 distinct communities. Because of the district changes, both individuals and the cities of Racine and Kenosha lost their independent voices and their sense of community. While teaching high school political science, we studied democracy in America. We learned that our democracy meant that the majority ruled within a structured government, and that our democracy meant one person, one vote. In light of our current extreme partisan redistricting, I'm sorry to say I could not promise my students their votes would count equally, or that we have the same type of democracy today. Instead, we would be discussing Wisconsin as a legislatively flawed democracy. Statewide elections have been close, and we are a politically purple state. Yet since the 2011 extreme gerrymander, the state legislature has been firmly controlled by one party. Because of many safe seats, the party in power has little incentive to negotiate, and the two communicate very poorly, if at all. Even issues as immediate and serious as the worldwide pandemic cannot bring a unified response. This is not good government. It's not representative of the people, and it cannot yield the best outcomes for the state. We need nonpartisan redistricting to inhibit one-party rule and to drive legislative decision makers together toward a middle ground rather than operating in separate silos. When that happens, our state government will be more deliberative, more representative of the people and the communities it serves. I ask you to recommend a system of nonpartisan redistricting for 2021, and that you draw sample maps showing the state how this can be accomplished. The principles of democracy demand the state return to as close to one person, one vote as practical. The serious issues facing our state demand we amplify the voices of underrepresented communities and enact a fair and equitable system of redistricting. Thank you for your time and attention.
Perfect. Thank you. Have a good evening. The next individual we have this evening is Joel Jacobson from the 1st Congressional District. And I believe that we are adding them now. Go. The next individual is Joel Jacobson. So Joel, if you would like to get started.
Sure, you got me? Hold up.
Yeah, you're great.
Connecting.
No, we can see you and we can hear you.
Oh, good. And vocals all right?
Yep, you go ahead. 3 minutes is starting right now. We'll wait. Let us know when you're ready.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Let us know when you're ready and I'll start the clock.
You guys came in so quick, I didn't expect it.
I know it came in
All right.
quick. Girl.
First of all, thank you to the, you see me all right there? Got it?
Yeah,
Camera, video, okay?
Yeah, you're great.
All right. Thank you to the commission. Greatly appreciate this opportunity for being able to discuss for those of us citizens, voters out here everywhere all over the state, in this case, CD1. I'm a 27-year resident of Burlington, twice former candidate for the 63rd Assembly and a UW La Crosse graduate. Representative democracy is messy. Every 2 years, thousands of candidates at the state and federal level vie for offices, bringing their viewpoints, prejudices, and expertise. Our founders struggled in vain to keep political parties out of the process based on their criticism of the British system, but ended up themselves with those same struggles to organize a stable government that is responsive to the will of the governed. In modern politics, both Republicans and Democrats have taken unfair advantage of the map drawing process every 10 years to gain political advantage. Since the 80s, especially, that process has become increasingly sophisticated with ever more powerful data systems that have created more disenfranchisement for the voters of the non-controlling party. Our recent US Supreme Court rulings have basically kicked the can down the road, leaving voters with almost zero ability to overcome the gerrymander and create legislatures that have no incentive to compromise or leave their ideological corner. 2008 is most notable in Wisconsin when the Democrats gained 54% of the total assembly vote and ended up with only 36% of the seats. The danger and destructiveness of this arrangement is that it not only creates de facto disenfranchisement, it also lends to ideological extremism and lower quality candidates. A candidate in this arrangement tends to be judged more on party loyalty than the ability to connect to the voters or have qualifying fitness for the office. Once in office, there is little incentive to compromise as there is no risk to lose the office in the next election. The result is effective governance suffers, and ultimately the voters are losers as even popular policy changes are ignored. In many states, this has been addressed with independent agencies drawing the maps to create fairness on both sides of the aisle. The Iowa model turns over the task of redrawing voting districts following each major census to a nonpartisan agency insulated from politics. The agency must draw districts that reflect changes in population and are as contiguous as possible while following the boundaries of communities. The agency is forbidden from considering the impact of the lines on politics. I would go a step further, and I know that they can tweak the software, just make it as competitive as possible on the map drawing. 2019, this is stats. 49 of Wisconsin's 72 counties have passed resolutions opposing partisan redistricting, and voters in 8 counties have endorsed a nonpartisan process such as Iowa's. And that was 2019. I think those numbers are higher now. It is clear that a majority of Wisconsin voters of all stripes want a nonpartisan process for drawing legislative maps. Their motive is a more responsive and effective government and less divisiveness. Thank you.
Have a good evening. The next individual is Nick Dempsey from the 1st Congressional District. Nick?
Thank you. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, again, my name is Nick Dempsey. I'm the county supervisor of Racine County's 1st District. I, of course, am here today to testify on the disease known as partisan gerrymandering, which has plagued the state of Wisconsin in unparalleled ways these last 10 years. Gerrymandering is an abomination, a perversion and distortion of the most foundational democratic values the United States of America is meant to stand for. Those who have committed gerrymandering in the state and everywhere, regardless of party affiliation, are guilty of the abuse of entire communities. Gerrymandering makes a mockery of democracy. Both major political parties have blood on their hands because of their failure in this state to protect their constituents from its malignant effects. While the Republican Party is clearly the culprit in this particular state's case, in terms of which group brought the plague upon the people of Wisconsin, the Democratic governing leaders of our state had their chance after the 2008 presidential election to reform our nonsensical redistricting process, and they failed to. They chose not to reform a system that could be abused because they believed they might be the ones who could potentially abuse it to their own benefit. And while the redistricting process most certainly went on to be abused in Wisconsin, they suddenly found themselves the victims of that abuse and not the perpetrators. Thus, again, both major parties failed us on this issue. There are endless, truly terrible outcomes that have resulted from this abuse of redistricting power, because every single problem that needs to be solved through the political process, whether it has to do with housing insecurity, criminal justice reform, infrastructure, early childhood education, anything, every single societal problem dependent on political solutions is stymied by this foundations level corruption of the democratic process. And the peoples most affected by this are the people who are already most vulnerable. While even the most conservative areas of the country have managed to make certain basic common sense political progress, Wisconsin has stagnated with worst practice policies from another era, and it is the people of our state who suffer because of it. This is a political justice issue. This is a racial justice issue as it disenfranchises Black voters and other voters of color at incredibly disproportionate rates. Ultimately, this is just a justice issue. The People's Maps Commission needs to prioritize a nonpartisan, unbiased redistricting process. The answer to all of these issues is right in front of our face. There are examples like the Iowa model that would transform the functionality of our state. Please make sure our redistricting process is fair for the first time in a decade and put in place the systems and policies to keep it nonpartisan going into the future, no matter which political party is in power in this state. Thank you very much.
Good evening. The next individual is John Lehman from the 1st Congressional District. John?
Good evening, Chairman Ford and members of the commission. My name is John Lehman. I'm a former state senator. Peter Barca talked about me. I was the guy who won and lost and won and lost in the 21st Senate District, a very wonderfully competitive district. I have my testimony in writing. I mailed it, snail mail, and I also emailed it to you. There, in that testimony, there's reference to a Rolling Stone magazine article, which is actually very good, on the 21st Senate District, if you want some reading on what really goes on around here, but a good analysis. I want to mainly testify on what legislators won't do. You guys caught Peter Barca when you asked him, how come you guys didn't do something as Democrats all in charge? Well, in a long time in the legislature, I was on several bills and resolutions trying to get independent redistricting. I can tell you it's not on the front burner. The legislators want to stay in power. The leaders want to stay in power, and they want to do redistricting behind the scenes. The best you're going to get out of the Democrats and Republicans is, okay, guys and gals, give us your last best offer. We're going to court. And that's the way, Peter and I have both been involved in 3 decennial redistrictings, but the 2 prior to the last one, basically get your map together because it's going to court, and you better be near the middle. You better give everybody a chance or your map's not going to prevail. And if you want to allow the political process to go as far as it can go, that's all you're going to get. Either you're going to get somebody trying to cheat and get their side to win only, or you're going to get people to say, give us your last best offer mediation. I would much prefer something like the Legislative Reference Bureau or an independent commission like yourself that doesn't have a partisan bias to draw those districts. Melissa asked the best question. Well, when you have a conflict between competitiveness and communities of interest, what do? I can tell you that with the Senate districts, you can't get just one community of interest. They're too big. You know, you're going to have several communities of interest in those Senate districts. So it's not really a problem there. Competitiveness, that's what you want. You want districts like the old 21st that are perfectly competitive. And you can't always leave a community of interest all by itself with its own little representative. Number one is competitiveness. If you have to, you know, give two or three representatives to Racine because there's no other way to do it. But maintain as much competitiveness as possible in your guidelines. Wisconsin is a purple state, as John Scott said. We need to do everything in the guidance that you give or the work that you do to keep it as competitive as possible. Thank you again for your time here. I know it's getting late. Read my testimony if you want to hear, or Google all my redistricting comments on the air over a decade. You know, I've talked about this a lot. I think it's the basis, the most important thing politically, the most important thing, like Peter says, to our grandchildren. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Have a good evening. And the last individual we have this evening is Mark Fuller of the 1st Congressional District. Mark? There you are.
Oh, hi.
Hi, go ahead whenever you're ready, and I'll start the 3 minutes.
I was trying to copy my notes, so I'd be looking at you.
No, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, hi, my name is Mark Fuller. Good evening. I retired last summer after 29 years of teaching at what used to be the University of Wisconsin at Rock County, a UROC we called it, and that's in Janesville here. Although it seems like we had always been subject to budget cuts, this last decade has been more intense in this regard. Some cuts are more understandable reactions to changing demographics. For example, like sometimes declining enrollments, fewer high school graduates, etc. Other cuts, however, are consequences of priorities at the state level. Over a year ago, our campus put in a food locker stocked with donated canned and dry food from staff and faculty. It was constantly in demand. Preventing hunger should be a higher priority. Shouldn't our tax dollars go towards solving this problem? This misguided ranking of our priorities is mirrored in other places as well. For example, in the fact that our school system needs to pass a referendum to raise enough money for overdue remodeling of aging buildings and aging heating systems, and for the retention of teachers. This could have been avoided with a responsive state legislature. A couple of years ago, the Rock County Board passed a resolution in favor of a nonpartisan process of redistricting. This last spring, it put a referendum on the ballot, and 80.6% of the population voted in favor of a nonpartisan redistricting process. So obtaining such a process is clearly a bipartisan desire in our county. We are all aware of the flaws in our infrastructure that the current COVID-19 pandemic continues to reveal. We may not have anticipated, however, a lack of responsiveness of our state legislature. Last May, 70% of Wisconsinites thought it appropriate to close schools and businesses and restrict public gathering. But last year, the Wisconsin legislature had met 18 times less frequently than their counterparts in other states. We will continue to see the tragic consequences of this lack of responsiveness. Currently in Wisconsin, more than 6,100 people have died and 580,000 more have been infected. A good friend of ours died of it just 2 weeks ago. Finally, once again, 72% of Wisconsinites were in favor of a mask mandate in October, according to a Marquette Law School poll. Let's prevent further possible lack of response. Let's continue to bring this important project and your commission to the people's attention. Thank you for your important work and for listening.
Thank you. And thank you for all the members of the public who testified this evening. Chair Ford, I will now pass it back to you to close out the hearing and adjourn.
Absolutely. And thank you all, members of the public, for your testimony. Thanks to everyone in the 1st Congressional District. I want to send a special thanks to Secretary Barca as well as Mayor Rosenberg as well for giving testimony tonight and giving us some additional information to consider for all of our commissioners. I wanted to, before we leave here, just to give a bit of an update. This is breaking news, as breaking as it gets here in our commission hearings, but about an hour after we went live for our hearing tonight, our web team, who's been working tirelessly on this effort, actually published our newest addition to the People's Maps Commission website. There is now the ability to submit communities of interest as well as submit your own districting maps. And so if you would like, go head over to our website. It's wisconsin.gov/people's maps, or you can Google People's Maps Commission and it'll take you directly to our website. As a reminder, our commission will hold another virtual public hearing on February 25th in the 6th Congressional District. Registration to testify for the February 25th hearing will open soon. However, individuals can submit written comments again to the commission at any point using that public input form, again at wisconsin.gov/people's maps. And we will be giving a formal announcement of those changes to our website as well. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks to all the commissioners, and we'll speak soon. This evening's hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Good night.
Have a good evening.
Night.
And everyone.
Good evening, everybody.